Flindog Woodwork is not sponsored by Tite Bond.
Hey, Wood! Wood! Wake up! Wake up! Hey! You paying attention? I don't know how the Wood Whisperer does it. Whew! Oh, hey! Welcome to Flindog Woodwork. This is Bryan. Today we're going to take a look at 10 items I purchased early in my woodworking career where I wish I would have purchased something a little bit different. So let's take a look at it today, and we're even going to save you a little bit of money. First up, let's talk glue application. Now when I first got into woodworking, every YouTuber was saying you gotta get a glue bot.
It's like a pet, a robot pet. You have to feed it and pet it or else it dies, and it's the coolest thing ever.
And to some extent, I agree. It's a great little device for spreading glue, even when the bottle is vertical. You can simply squeeze it and the glue will come out no matter what. So after having a glue bot for several years, I've encountered a few problems with them. First off, the seals on these are not the best. You can see here from the top, this glue bot in particular has got kind of a twisted seal and glue tends to leak out the top. Now if you look under the top of this glue bot, it's got the same seal as it does at the very tip. I've had problems with this seal moving on me and not being airtight. Once this happens, as you can see from this glue bot, glue tends to spread everywhere and glue actually accumulates on the rim. Once this happens, the glue bot becomes almost essentially useless as the seal is broken and it creates a very bad situation when you squeeze it. I've had glue spill out all over this glue bot, and as you can see from this dried glue, it causes a big problem. So what do I recommend instead? Well, it's these simple little restaurant squirters.
That works good.
I prefer the 24-ounce model, and these are great. Not only do they have a nice little seal on the top where you can keep your glue fresh, but they're easy to handle and easy to fill. This allows you to buy bigger portions of wood glue and store it in these little bottles. Now these bottles will not allow you to easily spread glue on a vertical surface. However, I ask myself, how often do I do that? And the answer is not that often. And of course I still have my glue bot, but this does the trick for me 95% of the time. Now let's talk push sticks. Now after you use a push stick for a while, it tends to get eaten up. As you can see from my old push stick here, it's really torn up and probably is getting to the point where it's not so safe to use. Now after realizing that my push stick may not be as safe as it should be, I purchased a lot of different types of push blocks. You can buy these fairly inexpensively off of Amazon.com and they're great. They've got some nice magnets on the base that allows you to stick it to your table saw and therefore it doesn't get lost. However, there's an even easier solution. If you have a bandsaw or a jigsaw, you can make your own push stick. And frankly, this push stick is much more stable and secure than any push stick I've purchased online. The nice thing about this push stick is it's got a nice little heel. This allows you to secure it on the wood as you push it through the table saw. It also has this nice long surface that allows you to hold down your wood firmly as you're pushing it through the table saw. So with some plywood scrap, you can easily make your own push stick. You can create your own design, and this is what I use most of the time these days. Now let's talk disposables for a bit. If you're like me, you hold on to sandpaper way too long. I'll even take a sanding pad after completing a project, take it off my sander, place it on my bench, and hope that someday I can resurrect it once again. So consumables are something that you don't want to spend money on over and over again. They're a necessary piece of any project, and you have to have them. Now you can purchase cheap sanding pads like these Diablo, which actually work pretty well. I also have these Festool sanding pads, which are extremely expensive, and frankly, I try to keep these as long as I can. So how can I extend the life of my sanding pads? Well, this is a great question, and it's something we're going to take a look at today. That's where this piece of rubber has a big impact on extending the life of all your sanding pads. So let's show you in real time how great these little erasers are. Now this is a belt sander that I used to clear some epoxy off of a tabletop. It is super dirty. You can see the dust flying off of it as I turn it on. Now, in real time, I'm going to take this eraser and make this sandpaper as good as new. Now to me, that's amazing. This sandpaper is as good as new, and we can continue to use it on our project. So next up on our list is something that I'm not even sure what it's called. It's a little device that allows you to create curves and lock it into place. Now the reason I purchased this was so that I could create some gentle curves on a chair I was making. But you don't need something fancy like this. Let me show you what you can do. So this is all you need: a hammer, a little bit of thin scrap wood, and 3 nails. So as you can see, I've created a gentle curve with this device. I'm going to create a very similar curve using just these simple pieces. So first up, I'm going to hammer in a nail into the center here. Next up, I'm going to put my wood right here, and I'm going to place the nails approximately where I think they should land if I want to create the same curve. So in this case, I want a nail right here and a nail right here. And I'll put this nail back in. So now that I have my 3 nails in, I can simply place this thin strip of wood in between the 3 nails, and it creates the same curve as this expensive piece of equipment does. I can then draw my lines and have a gentle curve right on my workpiece. Now let's take a look at some clamps I purchased early in my woodworking career. Now I purchased these long caul clamps thinking they would be great for when I'm jointing tabletops. These work by simply placing these little clamps on the edges of these 2 boards, and the 2 boards act like cauls as you're tightening the clamp. Now, there's a much easier way to do this and a much cheaper way to do this. Now let me show you what that is. So if you're anything like me, you're going to have some long pieces of hardwood laying around in your scrap pile. Now these pieces of wood can be as long as you want. In this instance, these pieces are approximately 2.5 feet long. Now one thing you're going to want to do is to place some packing tape, some duct tape, or some other tape that will not allow the glue to stick to these cauls. So let's take a look at how this works. I'll place one caul down on the board, then I'll place my 2 pieces of wood that I want to joint, then I simply place my other caul on top. Then it's simply a matter of taking my clamps and clamping the 2 cauls together. This will allow you to even out the surfaces of the 2 jointed boards and create a nice flat surface for your tabletop. One thing that's nice about this is you can create these cauls as long as you want. So if you have a 4-foot wide table, you can create 4-foot wide cauls. You simply just need to find the wood in your scrap pile and create the cauls to any size you want. Now let's talk regular clamps. Now over my woodworking career, I purchased a lot of these Irwin quick grips. These worked quite well for my first few years. However, I found that they just don't last like these Bessie clamps. One of the main problems with these clamps is that as you're using them, these little screws that attach the claw to the clamp will tend to get lost. Now there's no rhyme or reason for why this happens. I'm just here to tell you I've probably lost about 15 of these clamps because these screws come undone and I can't find the screws to replace them and fix them. So instead of getting these Irwin quick grip clamps, I would recommend spending a little extra money and getting Bessie clamps. Now I have never had a problem with any of my Bessie clamps. I almost exclusively use Bessie clamps in all my woodworking. Whether it's these C clamps or these quick clamps. They're great, they work well, I've never had one break on me, and believe it or not, I've actually saved money by spending a little bit more on these more expensive Bessie clamps than continuing to replace these Irwin clamps. So I recommend spend a little extra money on some high quality clamps, you won't regret it. Now let's talk big clamps. Now some of the first things I started off making in woodworking were tabletops. So I needed a clamp that would extend quite far. I started off by purchasing a lot of these larger clamps and quickly began to realize that the longer the clamp, the more expensive it is. You can even buy expensive extensions for clamps like these Bessie parallel clamps that will allow you to extend your range quite considerably. However, these are expensive and there's a much easier solution. And that solution is the pipe clamp. I absolutely love pipe clamps.
I love carpet. I love desk Brick, are you just looking at things in the office and saying that you love them?
I love lamp.
Do you really love the lamp, or are you just saying it because you saw it?
I have a variety of pipe clamps. I probably have about 15 of them, and they allow me to go to any length that I want. The nice thing about these is they're very secure. They're made of solid metal on both sides and provide a huge amount of clamping force to your workpiece. Now, most of these pipe clamps can be purchased either in the 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch diameter pipe. So when you purchase these, make sure you're paying attention to what size the clamps are. I even have one clamp here that is a whopping 10 feet long. Now, I'm here to tell you I've never clamped up something 10 feet long, but I could if I needed to. Now let's talk tape measures. Now, every tape measure is the same, right? Well, that's what I thought too. I've got a variety of tape measures here, and I think one of the most important things I've learned in woodworking is that once you start using a tape measure, stick with it through the entire project. The reason being is that many tape measures, although they're supposed to be calibrated the same fashion, they can tend to have a little bit of variance, and even a small little variance can make a huge difference in your projects. So let's take a look at these 5 tape measures, and I'll show you the differences we get.
So for this example, I spread out all 5 of the tape measures and created a tick mark at 36 inches. We're then going to take these tick marks and compare them by taking our square and lining it up with the base of the workpiece and showing how there's just a little bit of variance between each one.
So now I'll take my square and place it into alignment with some of these tick marks. And I'm going to find one tick mark that's the closest to the edge, and I'm going to strike a line. Now, in looking at these tick marks, you can see the variance of each of these tape measures. Some are in line and some have a little bit of variation. Now, the only reason these variances matter is if you're switching from one tape measure to another. Now, if you're keeping with one tape measure your entire build process, you're not going to run into a problem because you're comparing apples to apples. But if you switch tape measures along your project build, you're going to run into problems. And that little 1/16 of an inch is going to make a big difference when you're trying to put angles together. Now let's talk squares. If you're anything like me, when I went to Home Depot or Lowe's, I purchased squares like this. Now, I assume that these were the squares that every woodworker needs. You line them up to the edge, you strike your line, and you're done with it. The problem with these squares is there's no real way to ascertain whether or not the bottom of your square is in exact alignment with the end of your board. So therefore, if the end of your square is just a little off on the bottom, your line can be completely off and completely invalid. So what do I recommend for beginning woodworkers? Well, there's a couple of options. I would recommend any one of these squares. The nice thing about squares like this is that you can reference the bottom of your workpiece with the end of the square. They have a nice little lip at the bottom that allows you to hang your square over the edge of your workpiece. Therefore, you can create even and accurate lines every single time. Now, combination squares are great too. You can adjust them and you can create 45-degree angles as well. The problem with these combination squares, though, is they can tend to be inaccurate if you have just a little bit of variance in when you adjust your square. Now, if money's not an object for you, you can't go wrong with a Woodpecker 642. This is the best square and the most useful square that I have in my workshop. Okay, the last thing on my list is something that's a little bit strange. Now, when we're woodworking, we always think about vacuuming and dust collection. We think about how we're going to collect all the dust from our workpiece and make sure it doesn't get in our lungs. But I'm here to tell you that the standard leaf blower is one of the most useful tools I have in my shop for cleaning it up. I use this tool to blow out sawdust all the time. There's smaller versions of this which I think would be much more useful than this larger version. However, I cannot recommend enough a standard leaf blower to get rid of all that dust and debris that's accumulating in your workshop. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this hodgepodge of some of my experiences that I learned early in my woodworking career. I've really enjoyed sharing it with you, and I hope to see you again soon.
Well, thanks for joining me today as I revisit 10 things I wish I would have known early in my woodworking career.
I've made a lot of mistakes in my woodworking career, but I hope I learned just a little bit from each mistake. If you get a chance, I'd love to get your subscription, so leave a like and subscribe. Take care, and I'll see you again soon.